Okay, it's 9:45. Going to open up the executive session for the House Election Law Committee. Real brief, we're going to do the Pledge of Allegiance. Representative Ammon, you're joining us. You want to lead us in the pledge? Okay. We're going to open up the executive session for CACR relating to the New Hampshire presidential primary, providing that the New Hampshire presidential primary will be the first presidential primary of a presidential election cycle. With that, I'll recognize myself for a motion. I will move that CACR be inexpedient to legislate. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Seconded by
there was
Representative
also-
Lane. Seconded by Representative Lane. Is there discussion on the CACR? Hearing none, the clerk call the roll, and please call Representative Quayle first,
Okay.
because he is our ranking member for who's here.
Representative Quayle,
The motion is to inexpedient to legislate, and I vote yes.
Representative Prudhomme O'Brien. Oh, I'm sorry. Representative Cole, good to see you.
Yes.
Representative Ammon.
Yes.
Representative Inkerberg. Is he here?
It's absent.
Representative Burnham.
Yes.
Representative Kennedy.
Yes.
Representative Patuchik.
Patusik, yes.
Representative Wood.
Yes.
Representative Lane.
Yes.
Representative Ward.
Yes.
Representative Weber. Representative Hamblett.
Yes.
Representative Muirhead.
Yes.
Representative Bay.
Yes.
Representative Brennan.
Yes.
Representative Grill. Yes. New Hampshire's #1 DJ, Representative Vote.
Yes.
And the DJ of our committee, in a sense, Representative Berry.
Chair votes yes. With that, the ITL motion carries 19-0. I'll be closing the executive session for CACR 9. And once again, my apologies to the committee. My intention was to exec this at the session that we were supposed to have on Thursday, which we didn't happen. So I apologize for dragging you here again. My sincere apologies. And with that, we are closing. I'm sorry. Yes, ma'am. Yes, Representative Lane.
Would we like to put this on consent?
Oh, yeah. Well, that was yes. Any objection to consent calendar? Okay. It's on consent. With that, closing the executive session, and I'll see some of you for subcommittee. Thanks.
Nice to meet you.
Good chat. Yeah, right.
The Starbucks is open on Store
Whoa,
Street.
whoa. Before you said that with the hot mic, you say you drink Starbucks?
Colleagues for being here today, and thank you members of the interested public. We appreciate your presence. And I'm going to start today's Election Law Committee Subcommittee Work Session. And our topic is discussing ways in which we can improve our campaign finance system. And I think our mutual objective is to find the areas we can agree on. Thank you. So, thank you again for being here. Would someone care to open the discussion with what's on your mind? Oh, yeah, before I begin, I would just, I'm going to schedule 2 more meetings today, one for 2 weeks from today and another for 2 weeks after that. And I'm hoping that one of those meetings will include a representative from the Attorney General's office to talk to us about enforcement of campaign finance law. Maybe the next meeting,
There's
but
only one. If you need that, Jerry, sorry.
which, oh, yeah. Okay, thank you. And I think on the second of those 2 meetings, whichever one is open, I think it'd be a good time to start discussing, see where the areas of agreement are among us, and maybe start outlining what a report would look like. I'm not looking to truncate this process prematurely, but we've had several meetings now, and I think it's probably time to start thinking about the end product. All that sound good to you guys? 2 more meetings scheduled 2 weeks from today, another 2 weeks after that. That would be the 13th and the 27th. Thank you, Representative Ward. And one of those meetings, hopefully, we'll hear from the Attorney General's office, and the other will start planning what our end product will look like. Thank you. So, that said, Representative Muirhead.
That sounds like a good plan. And could we send something official and maybe urgent to the AG's office? Because if they came on the 13th, that would set us up to kind of define our tasks with more precision and be more productive on our second meeting on the 27th.
I agree with that. And Representative Lane has been working heroically to get their attention. And I'm sure they are very busy with things they need to get done also. But thank you, Representative Lane, for your efforts.
And one of my goals is over that sort of span of time between now and the 27th to come up with suggestions that would address most or all of the problems identified in the Secretary of State's memo. And I sort of just listed those in a very mechanical fashion in that handout that I just passed around. But there's kind of it's persuasive that the things identified as problems really are problems that don't involve the kind of political judgment that Democrats and Republicans often that generate disagreement, that are more administrative problems that good, clear legislation could solve. I think that's what the Secretary of State's memo that was a great service to us, and so I think.
Yeah, it was.
We should set as our task solving most of those problems.
Right. One example, I don't know if it's in your list, I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but the use of fiscal agent, financial agent, treasurer with regard to candidates and candidate committees. I can't see a reason why we can't settle on a single term there, a single phrase to use. Right. So, thank you. Yes.
There's another just maybe process-oriented thing. Representative Lane, did you pass around your definitions to everybody? So maybe at the next meeting, if people have this is just I'm speaking for you, Representative Lane. This is her, not her best and final effort. It was just kind of an initial effort to create to solve some of the problems that our current definitions create by writing new and better ones. But maybe everybody could take a look at those between now and the next meeting and come back with suggestions. so that we can make a little, we can lay down that foundation, the foundation of good definitions sooner rather than later.
I agree.
I can send them out electronically to the folks, if that helps.
Oh, yeah, that would
Okay.
definitely help,
All right.
right, to get an electronic copy.
And
Representative Muirhead, would you send one of your list also? Yeah. I started a similar list. I don't consider it ready to,
well, I
to-
was
to-
a
to-
little hesitant, but yeah.
but by our next meeting, I'll have something
Yeah.
that's,
Right.
a little
Well,
more
I
prepared.
figured this way everybody could look at them and say, no, that doesn't make sense. Or if we're going to do it this way, then we shouldn't do it, because the hardest thing I'm having trouble with is candidate and candidate committee. And do we require the candidate to have a candidate committee? And if we don't, then how do we work that filing? Or do we just have a separate? We have a political committee and a candidate committee and a candidate, and those are the only three things we have. I don't know. I'm trying to figure that approach out.
well, I've been thinking about that also.
Yeah.
And I do think enabling, particularly a state representative candidate to run as a candidate without having to form a committee reduces the burdensomeness of the process for state rep candidates, because those are not as expensive or complicated with regards to the campaigning. And if we make it too burdensome for what's typically a small effort compared to, the higher offices, then it increases the barrier to entry, which we don't want to do. We want to keep the barrier to entry for candidates at some level so we don't exclude people, is what I think. And as far as candidates and candidate committees in that state rep context, I've been thinking about this as well. I don't know why we couldn't just have the same set of requirements for both in terms of deadlines for reporting and, for that matter, for contribution limits, or one of the areas that right, you think in the same way? We'll have to look at it and look for pitfalls in that, but so far I'm not seeing any. One area that's different between the two were, if I remember right, limits on how much a candidate contribute to somebody else, another effort, versus how much a candidate committee could contribute. I mean, I'm not seeing why those should be different at this point. But that's just an example of
Right.
something we could bring into, make uniform.
Are we fairly decided that we want to put all of them no longer have exploratory campaign and either transition or whatever? We're just going to have one kind of cycle, and the limits are going to be on that cycle?
Yeah, that was one of the items on my list, which
Okay,
I need to refine a little bit.
okay.
But yeah, basically, I'm thinking we should define what we mean by election cycle, and we've discussed this in previous
Right.
meetings. I'm thinking the election cycle as defined should start the day after the general election and go through the day of the general election.
And I put that in one of those drafts because that seemed like something
Mm-hmm.
we agreed on, just to kind of, again, have the conversation, because I don't think Representative Barry was here last week.
She-
Last time we met, Representative Barry wasn't here, so I wanted him to see.
Yeah, he'll be here in a
Okay.
couple of minutes, by the way.
Okay,
But another item on my list, a common set of reporting deadlines for candidates and candidate committees. The list the Secretary of State's office, Mr. Fitch gave us, or the table showing the different reporting deadlines.
The only thing that I had about that is that some of these, particularly the super PACs, they start spending like sometimes right before the election or get really intense. So some of those reporting dates may not capture those before the election. So I can't remember if we have a reporting date not long before the election and then again right after. So just as a way of discussing it for the PACs that don't really start spending money until say a month or 45 days before, if we have them on a regular cycle, do we put it close enough, or some places tie it to when they make I think even now, our own one says expenditures over a certain amount, you have to immediately report them or within 3 days or something. So, but then we start differentiating, and again, it makes it more complicated, but, so I'm just throwing it out there.
No, I
because, yeah.
understand. I was actually thinking specifically of the distinction between a candidate running as a candidate and as his or her own fiscal agent, for example, and a candidate committee. And I think a candidate committee is already defined differently from a political committee in general. And let's see. And I think we've discussed this also. I was also thinking right now we have an election cycle. Did we find a definition of that term in the statutes? Does it exist? No. It's kind of, I think most people assume it's what we were just talking about, which is the day after the general election through the day of the next general election. But the election cycle has, I think, 3 phases, right? There's pre-filing, there's the primary period, and then there's the general election period. Did I leave anything out? And when the Secretary of State was here with Mr. Fitch, I think he was floating the idea of having, the date that a candidate files his or her candidacy would be the date on which they officially become a candidate. And I was thinking that made some good sense.
I don't like it because there's a lot of campaign finance going on before you announce. I mean, and so you would lose all of that. You would lose all of that transparency. So if somebody's really smart, you donate, you get all your donations and spend as much as you want before, which you can do, and then, but you don't have to declare it. And you're not really a candidate. So when I floated a balloon in what I drafted, that it's like when you start acting like a candidate and when you get contributions and you get dispersed and you start making disbursements, that's when you're a candidate. And then I guess then you have to start reporting.
I haven't completely thought that through yet.
Yeah.
What my thinking was more along the lines, we do have in the statutes that when you put out advertising intended to promote or elect someone as a candidate, and maybe we can work it around that. I don't have to think about it more. Yeah.
It does offer a broader definition of candidate than just when you announce, because, even in my small unopposed one, I was running well before I filed.
Well, and with a 2-year term for any office, you're
We're
really
always running.
the campaign is never over,
Right.
really. if you're intending to run again. You did say something a bit ago about removing some committee types, and one of the ones you mentioned was the exploratory committee. Did I remember that? Did I hear that right?
We talked about exploratory, then the campaign, and then there's three different kinds, I think, right now in the three of them.
Heck.
Is it transition or inauguration?
That's the.
It's the one in the. So when we were talking before, we were saying, let's just say, for instance, I think it's 5,000 for each category. So in other words, just make it 15,000 for the whole shebang. So you can give 15,000 from the time, that candidate is a candidate until the election day. And if you want to do it early, great. If you don't, you can wait. But I think rather than have all these, it's not a lot. I don't know how many people have exploratory campaigns. I'm trying to find it in the statute.
Yeah. That's going to take some more thought on my part.
Yeah, it's
Again-
primary. Yeah, it's in 664-4. So it's the maximum amount contributed during exploratory, then during the primary, and then during the election. And so the idea is that you can, and I think this was Representative Barry's suggestion, is that then the total then for a candidate would be 15,000. And for a non-candidate, and then they divide it up by different political committees, which we can do or cannot do. I mean, we can decide. I think for the ones that are, quote, super PACs, we can't limit their expenditures under federal law. We can't limit those expenditures. So, but you can limit the campaign political contributions. So. But
A concern I always have is balancing the usefulness of transparency in campaign finance for the public, the voters. Balance that against the absolute respect I think we need to have for
Yeah.
the rights guaranteed by the First Amendment.
right.
And to me, an exploratory committee, so-called, I mean, what's to stop someone from collecting money from people who like him to put ads saying he's a terrific fella or a wonderful woman or an excellent individual? I mean, a person has a right to do that, right? And so that's where that's where I could agree with the exploratory committee designation just going away. I mean, someone could be exploring how much support they might get. They could people could sponsor ads saying how wonderful they are and then do polling. There's nothing to prevent that. There shouldn't be anything to prevent that, all on their own, privately. That's an exploration, right? In a sense,
I'm sorry. I know I'm jumping in and out of here.
Representative Berry, that's fine.
This was your idea.
Yes, I know. That's why I'm going to opine on it.
We welcome whatever little bit of your time you can spare us.
It seems to be fleeting. If we can't get rid of exploratory altogether, a easy compromise would be to cap how much it can take in entirely. Say, if you're going to form an exploratory committee, you may take in no more than $15,000, period, or something like that. That's a compromise. If we all just want to get rid of it, I'm fine with that. I think it's just a loop. I don't want to say a loophole, but I just find the notion that you can raise a bajillion dollars as an exploratory committee. It's like you're not. If I raise $1 million to run for state representative, am I exploring state representative? I think I figured it out.
Representative Muirhead.
I mean, just the sort of mechanical facts are that the cycle, as you've defined it, accurately, runs from the day after an election, general election, till the day of the next general election. So that's the period of time in which somebody might, campaign more or less officially. And the only moment at which we formally know somebody's a candidate is the moment at which they file.
Right.
And so that would just be roughly the last 6 months of that 24-month period, which leaves open an 18-month period in which they might raise and spend money.
Right.
But of course, there's no way to know they're a candidate because they don't have to file until June or whatever. Once they officially file, there are these two, chunks of the campaign, the primary campaign and then the general election campaign. And so that's what creates this three categories. But I think and of course, as you say, there's on one hand a kind of freedom value that says anybody should be able to, raise and spend money to do whatever is legal, including advance their reputation if that's the way.
That's a good way to put it, right? That's what I had in mind.
And there's also a, kind of a anti-corruption. That would normally be dispositive, and it would rule out any regulations on what people can raise and spend at any point in a campaign, except that, citizens, representatives, and courts have said that the public hasn't, an interest in monitoring what people raise and spend and advancing themselves for public office in an effort to combat corruption. And so that is what allows us to regulate what people raise and spend, but it's just that the formalities of things allow us to do it more effectively after they file and less effectively in that window of time before they file. And so I see that, the Barry kind of instinct here is to treat this whole window of time the same way and say in that whole window of time people should be able to raise X for advancing themselves, and they have to let, once they hit a threshold, let the voters know who they're raising money from and what they're spending money on.
Yeah, and we're not saying they can't raise the money. It's just basically you just have to tell people how you're spending the money, who you're raising it from, and how you're spending it. So, and these are usually going to be for the bigger races. So governor, executive council, and state senate. So they would probably have staff doing that.
I like the phrase Representative Muirhead, though, about people raising money and spending it to enhance their reputation, or for that matter, publicize their views on various issues of the day. Does our election system have a legitimate interest, a compelling interest in regulating that? Because people are free to express their views on any issue. And so we have a compelling transparency interest to regulate or monitor that. I'm not convinced of that. In fact, I'm from our past discussions, you probably understand already, I'm biased against regulation of free speech to begin with, and I really need a really good reason to infringe on it, in my view. So how do you separate them? Just let me rephrase the question a little bit. If someone spends a year publicizing their views on important and sometimes controversial issues and saying how wonderful they'll be for dealing with it, but never ever mentions the word candidate. If we're going to put this in statute, it has to be defined so it's some unambiguous set of criteria. If we can do that, I mean, and so also that people won't be using the term loophole. Personally, I'm actually kind of fatigued with the word loophole, because to me, if you're within the law, are you within the law as far as the law is concerned? But anyway, so there's my question.
I think to that end, my issue with the quote exploratory phase is candidates start getting into the level of ridiculousness of, if I were to run for governor, or, and I think maybe a summation we can all agree with is, when is exploring no longer exploring, right? And federally, it's defined as when they say, I'm running for X, right? And in the state, we say it's when you file in June. So I think that's kind of, I guess that's something that I'm trying to avoid in this, is the ridiculousness of, if I was to run for governor, you know, when they're not actually exploring a race, they're fully invested, they have staff, right? You know, and so I get that. I mean, you know, an easy solution is to eliminate the exploratory phase and just take the 15 grand and divide it up 75 and 75, and call it a day. I think the filing period, I know that we tie the filing period to campaign finance laws. We don't have to do that. The feds don't do that. They don't tie filing to, they do some on reporting. They'll tie to report on reporting, but the feds, you're a declared candidate when you declare that you're a candidate. Doesn't mean we have to do it that way. I certainly have my issue with how the feds handle things. But I guess like that's kind of like my sentiment is, I just don't want candidates running around being ridiculous, saying, you know, if I were to run for governor, it's like, nah, bro, you've raised $2 million, you're running for governor. You know, so I guess that's kind of my sentiment on it. Is it the worst of all evils? No. If we can clean it up, get rid of it, or whatever. Yeah, if your issue is the limiting of the speech, you know, then you just eliminate the period and break up the 15K over the 2 periods, and you effectively have the same outcome without having the ridiculousness of, if I were to run for governor.
But one of my concerns also, one of my concerns also is that whatever we come up with, we try to come up with some unambiguous criterion for who's a candidate, with the hope that that will reduce the amount of argument that has to take place in the courts. Now that's an idealistic notion, but because people are really clever, and people as a class are very good at communicating in a way that we can't really control, nor should we. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Representative Muir had his hand up. You know, a way around all of the exploratory, to be counterpoint, is we eliminate exploratory. A way around it is they just form a PAC, and they operate out of the PAC until they file.
Okay.
And you see that happen all the time.
Yeah, we do.
You know, so it's like, there's no perfect outcome. I want to eliminate the ridiculousness. You know,
Perfection is not only unobtainable, it's really, we really don't even know what it would mean. So, Representative Muirhead.
Yeah, and I think we can respect the Quayle principle that that aiming for perfection, you know, is a fool's errand, without at the same time aim for some improvement over the laws that are already on the books with respect to this stuff.
Right.
The second thing we want to respect is what you're voicing, the freedom interest in speech in general, and in various types of political speech. And so the only speech that we're addressing, and that our laws already address, is speech that aims to influence an election by promoting, opposing, attacking, or supporting a measure or a candidate. And so there's various political speech that this doesn't include, such as, say, if you want to create a documentary on global warming like Al Gore did and spend millions and millions of dollars making it, that's not regulated by this. If you want to say, if you have an insurance company and you're going to say, Betsy Smith's a jolly good person and you should buy insurance from her, or a car dealership or whatever, you can promote your reputation with billboards and ads and radio spots. Also, wouldn't be regulated by this code, that kind of commercial speech. So this is only about influencing money spent to influence an election by supporting or opposing, roughly speaking, measures or persons. And the question, what you want to do, Ross, as I understand it, is address in a consistent way this period of time between the day after a general election and when a candidate files. And maybe, it'll turn out that the Quayle principle of pursuing perfection means anything we try here just won't work and we'll have to give it up. But we should at least see what we can do before assuming we can't get any improvement in that.
And having looked through the election law, our election system laws, the campaign finance laws, and having looked at the Secretary of State's memo from Mr. Fitch, I'm convinced, I think we're all convinced, we can find areas of agreement where things can be improved, even if just to remove contradictions and sources of confusion.
So,
I did have a thought about, sources of confusion about when does this end, right? Cause we talked about that with the loans 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
I did have some expounding thoughts on that, which is we could set the end of the period as the certification of the election. Cause that is in fact the end. When the election is certified and all the legal contests are over, it's over. At that point, it is done. So that's I just wanted to toss that out there because I did have that thought. That may be a happy middle ground for me wanting to end it the day after the election and other people wanting it to go on for 6 months. Maybe the certification and secession?
Excuse me?
When it stops. Secession? When it stops? No.
yeah.
When all legal contests have ended.
And sometimes that could be a really long time, though. I mean, if somebody really wants, because there was one that was being contested to the Ballot Law Commission quite a long time.
Which one?
Can't remember. Was it a Senate? It was a Senate. Maybe he wasn't contesting it. I don't know.
I think I know what you're talking about.
It was a Senate.
Those absentee ballot ones?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, but the election was certified. It was over. A member was sat. I mean, it was done. It was it. Like what was to be gained?
Right. And we did talk about the loan piece too as well, because you had mentioned if you make a loan and you want to pay it back, that would be, you could raise money to do that as long as you're paying things off from your prior that were incurred during your election. If you're raising new money to pay off debts, in other words, there are no loans, that's going to be in the next election cycle. We just figured we needed a bright line. So whether it's the date of certification or whether it's the date after, I think it was just trying to find a bright line as to when those would be, because a lot of people do loans, even bank loans or whatever, as long as you're paying them off.
Oh man, to take a bank loan, run a campaign.
Yeah.
Yep.
You deserve all the things that happened to you.
Well, that's tied to my thought that we should define an election cycle by certain dates that everybody will know. And you brought up the thought about, so that then we can define a previous election cycle and a current election cycle. And I think we need to make sure that candidates still have the opportunity to raise funds if people will contribute to pay off loans they took for the previous election cycle. Currently, you can retain those funds. You can only spend them for, if you ran in the previous election cycle, you can retain those funds under your control, but they can only be used for certain specific politically related purposes or to be donated to an approved charity. Am I getting that right? And you can roll them over to the next the current election cycle. Did I leave anything out there, Ross?
No, I mean that's
That's the basics.
I've said before I have issues with that because that's not how the money's going to work. But what would happen is they would, if I took out a $20,000 loan and my election ended and I won, and I had $20,000 sitting on the book, and then Russ wanted to give me $20,000 to help me pay off my loans.
Yep.
I would then on paper pay off my loans and then give myself another $20,000 loan on the other side because the money's already been spent. And that's my problem is that rolling of the loan is what's going to happen. Is they're just going to it's a way for Russ to give me $40,000. I look forward to that check.
I thought I already gave you that.
Oh well, it didn't clear, so
You should have got a note.
Well, if the loan I guess it. So is he going to be able to give then over the campaign contribution amount, right? Is that what you're saying?
that's my concern.
Yeah.
Is if they would be able to the extent that campaign finance laws should exist within the confines of the First Amendment, They should be equally applied, rigid, and
Right.
not, once again, not easily circumventable. That doesn't mean that we will be able to prevent everything. I'm not.
Right.
It's not, we're not going to get perfection.
Yeah,
And-
I'm not so naive to believe that we could do that. But I do believe that you can knock out the main easy ways that are done to.
Right.
I don't want to use the term loophole because that's not appropriate, but
think
to
it is.
circumvent the intention of the law.
So, so the scenario, as I understand it, that you're suggesting is something where I have a, campaign of Muirhead in 2014, Muirhead in 2016, Muirhead in 2018, 2020, 2022. They all are in debt
Mhm.
because of money I spent. I essentially loaned the campaigns, and I can raise money to pay off those debts to myself simultaneously for all those campaigns. And
And then
if
go
each
loan.
campaign has its own limit, then I could raise a lot of money.
Yeah. I mean, you could do something as create, you pay off $20,000 and then remember you're allowed to give to your campaign an unlimited amount of money. It's your campaign. So then you paid off $20,000 in debt from 2020 and now you've made a $20,000 contribution from yourself into 2022. Once again, circumventing the intention of the election finance contribution laws. That's my issues with loans. I have huge issues with loans just because of how it's an accounting trick to move money around. That's what it is. The reality is the people who loan money into campaigns. The reality is people who loan money into campaigns know they're not getting it back. That's the reality. You can make the statement if it's a loan, they expect to get it back. The reality is they know they're not getting it back.
Now he tells us.
So what happens then from?
Yeah, don't you wish you'd known that?
Yeah, really, I know. Now you tell me.
Sorry, Russ.
So, so what happens if you don't give it back? Then you just have it. You maintain it on your books, and you carry a deficit for that election.
You have to
cycle?
keep filing a report forever,
I mean,
every 6 months, right?
I would make the way you close it up is you'd say if you haven't paid off the loan by insert date that we could quibble over, you're eating, the loan shall not be repaid back, and the candidate's eating that. It's closed. It's done.
Okay.
You have if you've won your election, you have 6 months or however long it is right now. It's 6 months to go and backfill that. Like you had 6 months to backfill that.
So the loan then, if it's a self-made loan, so if it's a loan from the candidate,
Yeah, I've never seen a loan that wasn't from the candidate.
okay, I just
Yeah.
checking.
Well,
Okay,
in
so
fact,
you're-
it would have to be from the candidate because if it's from another entity, that entity is now making a campaign finance violation.
Exactly.
So I guess you could have.
That's,
I guess.
that's where I was headed. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Okay.
guess in theory you could. I guess in theory anyone could loan a campaign up to the limit. In theory.
So you're talking specifically loans made by a candidate to his or her own campaign.
Well, that's virtually all campaign finance loans.
I understand you're saying that's virtually all, but you are talking specifically about loans a candidate makes to that candidate's own campaign, right?
I have never seen a loan in campaign finance from anyone other than the candidate.
Right, but you're not answering my question.
I'm not sorry. I'm not trying to dodge it. What is the question specifically?
Like, no, but I understand that you're saying as a practical, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to sound that way.
No, it's okay.
But you're saying as a practical matter, you've never seen a case of a loan to a campaign except from the candidate,
Correct.
the candidates themselves.
And I would imagine that if another entity made a loan to a candidate, it would have to be by definition a contribution.
Right.
And at that point, I would question if it's a loan because if it's a contribution in and you pay it back, well, that's just refunding a contribution.
So I'm sorry, I had one more thought. So again, you're talking specifically about loans that candidates make to their own campaigns.
Yes.
And what I'm getting from your comments is that it would be adequate to define it that way in a statute because as a practical matter, you've never seen any other kind of loan.
Yes, yes, that is correct. I would love to find the bank that would loan me $1 million to run for governor.
And then you'd move to the Caribbean or?
No, I would just close up the committee and they'd go after the dead entity.
Anyway.
That would be it. That's why they would never do it.
Anyway.
That's why they,
Yeah.
like loaning money to an LLC. They're not, you don't have any assets.
Okay.
They're not going to do
So
that.
so I don't see a problem on the face of it with putting a limit on how long a candidate has to clear a loan that candidate made. The candidates make for their own campaigns.
Correct.
You don't always understand everything about an idea in the first few minutes, right?
Mhm.
But on the face of it, I don't see a.
Yeah,
I
that's
don't
my-
react as that being an issue to
Yeah,
me.
that's my issue. I don't want the loan used as an accounting trick to run around the laws that we've spent a long time. We are spending a long time trying to set. That being said, if a candidate wants to loan their campaign $100,000, that's their business. They have a right to put in as much as they want. And if donors want to give to them under the auspices that they could be repaying back the loan from the candidate, that's fine. I just have a problem when that's being done 6 years down the road.
Right. So what you're saying is you're proposing there be a time limit during which for that election cycle, that loan from the candidate could be paid back.
Correct.
Okay, let's think about that. That's,
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
yeah. Representative Muirhead, you had a comment?
So I think we should get the right advice we need to deal with the loan issue. It's plausible to me that various entities might make effective loans to a campaign. If I go and I buy 100 pizzas for your campaign and I've already hit the contribution limit, then your campaign needs to refund me for those 100 pizzas. I've effectively made a loan at the value of those pizzas. Or if you rent a fleet of vans for the Get Out the Vote. No?
You've made, if you go and buy 100 pizzas, you've made an in-kind contribution. You have bought an item.
Mhm.
You have bought an item and then immediately made an expenditure with it.
Okay.
So you're on both sides of a ledger. So if you bought 100 pizzas, $1,000, you would have an in-kind contribution, Russ Muirhead, $1,000 on the receipt end of the ledger, and you'd have $1,000 in-kind contribution on the expenditure ledger. It happens on the same day, and that's current law, and it counts towards your threshold.
What if I've already hit the threshold and I buy some pizzas just to facilitate the event and I expect the campaign to pay me back for those pizzas because I've already hit the limit?
Then in theory you have made a so if the campaign pays you back, that's not really a loan. That's just them reimbursing you for an expenditure.
There's a period of time between the time I pay for those pizzas and the time in which they pay me back. And during that time, I've made them a loan.
I think it would be the expectation, right? If I go and I buy
Yeah.
pizzas for volunteers at noon and I give it to them at 1:00, and then at 5:00 you've reimbursed me. I mean, because in that sense, any staffer who files an expenditure report at the end of the month has made an in-kind contribution, but there's no there is the expectation that they be paid back immediately, versus a candidate loan there's no expectation to be paid back immediately or within 30 days or whatever. I totally see where you're saying it's actually kind of a brilliant way to get there, but I don't think that would qualify as a loan. That's a,
It's almost like a vendor.
yeah, it's like a vendor. Like if, and that's a great way to put it. Like, I don't know which, there are some vendors that have terms with parties and candidates of, net 30 day and that sort of stuff. That's not an in-kind contribution. Or legal fees, right? If you don't even know what the bill is, you're incurring the services, but there's the expectation that you'll be paid back. An in-kind contribution would be you buy the pizzas with the expectation you don't get paid back.
This is a good example, though, what we all understand, which I was saying earlier. People are very clever about finding ways to do things. So we can't control it all. Can we make some changes that improve things? And all this business with loans and repaying and all that, with the candidate, under the current system, that is still transparent. People can find out that's going on.
Yeah, and when you see, on reimbursements, to what Representative Muirhead's trying to saying is, they don't go in if you, let's take the pizzas again, right? And you expect to be reimbursed for the pizzas. You're not buying them for the campaign volunteers. You are buying them with the expectation of being reimbursed. It wouldn't go in as $1,000 of pizzas to Representative Muirhead. It would go in as $1,000 of pizzas from Papa John an expenditure to Papa John's. Your name actually, in theory, should never appear on it because you didn't make the pizzas. All you did was buy them and transport them. That's how that's supposed to be done. Otherwise, you can obfuscate literally anything in an expenditure line by saying it's a reimbursement clouded through a vendor.
Representative Burhead, you had a comment?
And on the, just the earlier, your earlier concern, Ross, about the exploratory period. You know, one possible solution would be to have a law that says something like any person or group that raises or spends X dollars, whatever the threshold is, to peso, a measure person, during an election cycle must, you know, register as a candidate or committee and must not raise more than Y dollars, whatever the limit is, from any person or group. And at that point, we get away with the distinction between exploratory, primary, and general, and treat both, you know, persons and groups the same. Is that the kind of thing you want to work toward?
Yes, simplification, less entity types, streamline, uniform contribution limits. I would love it if RSA 664 was like 4 pages, not with loopholes or not. I know it's not the word to use. Not with easy ways to circumvent the intent of the legislator, but removing the unnecessarily complex aspects of it, and specifically with exploratory committees, what I view as the ridiculousness of it. There is a person running for governor right now who is marching in parades, raising funds, and says they are exploring a race for governor. They have staff. They are running a campaign. There is nothing exploring about that. They are doing that, and not going to name names because no point to it. I'm just saying it happens. It happens every day.
One doing that right now.
There's one that I'm aware of, but I am sure. To your point, I'm sure there will be more. And it's not to say that candidate, an exploratory candidate, is doing anything wrong or nefarious. It's just ridiculous. Just declare what you're running for, because your exploratory phase ended when you raised $100,000 or whatever it was. You know, you have the funds you need to figure out if you want to run or not, because nothing stops you from stopping and running at any point. Including if you file for a primary, nothing stops you. Your name just doesn't come off the ballot. Because I've always viewed the filing period as these are the names that go on the ballot, and little more than that. Because the reality is the primary, not to get into the primary date discussions, but the primary doesn't begin the first week of June. We all know that that's a joke. Like, we all know that's not true. The primary begins when candidates start running for that office.
A year before that.
A year before that, which, by the way, is totally their right. Probably the smart thing to do politically. But let's not act like it's anything. My issue with exploratory candidacy is it acts like it's something that it's not. And like, let's just drop the pretense of what it is. You know, there's very little in politics. There's very little legitimate exploratory activity. There is some. I would never say that there's none. But the reality is once you start getting to certain thresholds, you know, if you raise $1 million in an exploratory campaign, you're going to tell me that person's not running? Like, come on now. They got $1 million to advance their name and their ideas. You know, and they don't even need, by the way, they don't even need to declare an office. Like, you can form a candidates or I know we don't call it that anymore, but you can form a candidates committee, or whatever the term we want to use, right? The contribution limits are the same across the board for state offices. So it doesn't matter. You're a candidate for office, period. It doesn't matter. The limits, the contribution limit for state rep are the same as the contribution limits for governor, council, state senate. They're all exactly the same. So it's even if you changed your mind, it would still be irrelevant.
So what exactly are you proposing we change?
What I would propose is eliminate the exploratory phase in the interests of what I would believe your concerns, and also my concerns is that we don't artificially depress the contribution limit. So take the 5, 5, and 5 and make it 75 and 75. Call it a day. I could personally tolerate a world where it was 5 and 5. But if we need a compromise to get to the 2 phases, that's fine. And if you want to leave exploratory phase in there for legitimate exploratory phase activity, put in a total receipt limit, not individual donor receipt limit, total organizational receipt limit. We can debate over that number, what it may be. But that would be, if I was making, let's call it the ideal system,
Representative Ward?
that's what I would go, because
Oh.
is somebody going to form an exploratory committee for that's to go to the chair?
You guys are subtle.
I haven't gotten a note for
Russ-
decades.
I've seen notes in class.
It's first in class. Is anybody here going to form an exploratory committee to run for state representative, or are you just going to run for a state representative? It's a legitimate question. But for governor, by the way, I think there is a legitimate phase of that.
You gotta ask your spouse, and if your spouse won't support you, you've had it.
That's the exploration.
If that was the case, I wouldn't have won twice. I believe my wife did tell me she voted against. She told me she voted against me the first time and voted for me the second time. She said I earned that vote the second time. So
Yes,
maybe
I-
it's because she liked how much I was out of the house. She's like, "Oh, this is awesome." This is awesome.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I need to think about that a little bit more.
I do too.
I kind of like the idea of just having one kind of, this is the time, and
To-
just blend them all together.
Yeah, in terms of contribution limits, that's kind of what we're talking about here,
Yeah.
basically.
Because
Do we really need 2 phases, even primary and general? Do we need those? Again, I'm not suggesting we change anything about how these amounts are reported.
right,
I mean, I looked at that again last night, and the reporting element would stay the same, but do we need to have separate limits for a primary and a general election? Individual,
don't-
those are contributions from individuals, basically.
yeah. I
And
mean,
organizations.
part of me is like, no, because I know that some people might want to wait to see who wins the primary and then give that money, but they can still do that.
Right.
In other words, they give the person, say, if the total amount is 15, they give them 10, and then if they win the primary, they give them another 5.
There are a lot of donors that do that.
Right.
And they still could.
They still could.
And it doesn't change their behavior. So I'm just wondering, what is that division doing?
Well,
I don't know.
So to answer the question, what it does is it prevents the money from being spent in the primary. So if the contribution limits are 5, 5, and 5 right now, let's just say 5 and 5 to keep it simple for right now. If I go and I give you $10,000, in theory, you can only spend 5,000 of that dollars. And if you don't make it through the primary, you have to give me my money back. Or you have to spend it, I guess, on your, I don't know exactly how the state laws are written, but I think you'd have to, you can't spend that $5,000, that second $5,000 until after the primary phase is over.
Oh, okay.
And there are, like on the federal side, I know you cannot spend that money. And that if you don't win your primary, you actually do have to give it back.
I don't know that we have that in state.
I don't know if you have to give it back in state.
My understanding is,
I know you can't spend it.
I'd have to look it up to quote it exactly. I don't want to take the time,
Right.
slow the conversation down. But my understanding from having read that recently, if you have money left over at the end of a campaign, whether primary or general, when the campaign's over, you can use it for certain politically related purposes. You can donate to another candidate, I believe, in the next election cycle. You can roll it over, and if you're going to run again for some office, you can use it for that purpose, or you can donate it to a charitable organization of some type, and I think that's specified, some approved charitable organization. That's how I understand you have to use the funds
Is
if you're not using them in another campaign,
surplus.
some
There's a
other
section
political
called
purpose
surplus.
or charitable purpose.
Where is it?
You can't. The main point is you cannot convert it to personal use. which we all have to agree that that makes perfect sense, right?
What?
Yeah, right.
No new Camaro?
Well,
All
it makes
right.
perfect sense to me.
Okay.
Someone wants to look it up.
No, I'm looking here to surplus campaign contributions. Surplus campaign contributions may be used after a general or special election for fundraising activities and any politically related activity sponsored by the candidate or for donations to charitable organizations.
Right.
Such surplus contributions, however, shall not be used for personal purposes. I believe Representative Quayle, you nailed that.
Okay,
It's impressive.
Does it again.
He does it again.
you sound surprised. No.
I'm routinely surprised by you, Representative Quayle.
Not as astonished as I was watching the first 10 minutes of the basketball game last night.
Oh.
Please, let's not go there. So, so reading this, you couldn't give it to your party or another PAC. It has to be something related activity sponsored by the candidate.
Hmm.
So what does that mean?
Well, I don't. It's ambiguous. So surplus campaign contributions may be
Yeah.
used for general or special election. May be
page?
used after a general or special election fund for fundraising activities.
Because I think
which
that's
If I
on
page
the
give it to my
list.
party, is that a fundraising activity?
That's what I wonder. And I recall that I
27.
think this was on the Secretary of State's list about surplus,
Yeah, it was.
Thank you.
what to do about surplus funds.
Got it.
Because it came up in my confusion of filing my own personal campaign. What do I do with it?
That's interesting.
Yeah, I think,
Well, that's why we have courts, I guess.
So we all love it when election laws go to the courts. You know,
There's really no way to write a campaign finance law that doesn't get.
no. I remember one of the first things that Chairman
Exactly.
Griffin told me. Said, Ross, you should be aware there's 3 election law committees. There's the House, the Senate, and then the courts.
Right. Well, you can't,
Excuse myself briefly.
you bet.
yeah, I don't see it, but I'm pretty sure he talked about it, about surplus. I was just looking in his memo
Oh,
from the
okay.
Secretary of State. I
Oh,
was
I don't
pretty sure
remember
they
that.
mentioned that what to do with surplus was a question that they get. And we can go back and ask, but I think I still think we need to clarify it and what they can give it to. It's 664:4-B,
664:4-B, surplus campaign contributions
Yeah,
on
it's-
page 227.
227.
Yep.
So, and then another question I had when we were talking about loans and going back and forth, there's no limit right now, and I'm not advocating we have one,
Mhm.
on an individual, the amount of self-funding by an individual. It's not clear to me how many people report that
So,
and if it's reportable. And I guess my thought would be, from a transparency standpoint, I'm not saying you can't fund, but if you're going to self-fund, that you disclose that.
I think you do have to disclose that already. It's on the form, contributions by candidate. It's just unlimited.
You'd have to put it in.
You'd have to put it in, yeah.
All right,
Yeah,
okay.
you can't just,
That
you
was,
can't
that,
just.
that was my impression too. With
Okay.
my first campaign a couple of years ago, I made myself, a small loan just to get the bank account up and running. Because I had a separate bank account.
Right.
And then I did repay that, after the election, but I reported all that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
that was
I
my
think
understanding.
too. Okay, all right.
I don't bother with the loan. I don't think the money's coming back.
Excuse me?
See what I did there? I said I don't bother with the loan because I don't think the money's coming back.
I'm honest even with myself.
I always put in my own campaign. It makes it easier to have other people give me money. As I tell them, look, I'm invested too.
Right.
Because you gotta get that $100 a year job.
Well, it's my opinion. I'm not limiting discussion, and it's not my job as a chairman of this particular subcommittee. But I think we've discussed the the phases of the election cycle and exploratory committees, it seems like we have a general sentiment here amongst us that we could dispense with exploratory committee as a category of political committee. Do we all agree with that?
It's fine. with-
And the other two categories too, possibly.
Which other?
Primary and general.
Yeah, we,
Just have one.
in terms of contribution limits.
In terms of campaign finance contribution limits, yes. One, we'll have to debate what the total, because at that point, if we go to singular status, we would have to have a debate on to what the contribution limit would be from an individual donor for singular status.
I think
What do you mean by singular?
Well,
singular
if there's,
status?
if you
it's
get
just
rid of,
one phase.
so right now there's 3 phases at $5,000 each,
Right,
right? If you get rid of the phases, you are, we can't just go from $15,000 contribution limit to $5,000 overall contribution.
no,
Right.
I would just make it 15
don't-
and then 30 for, I mean, just what
Okay.
the total already is.
I'll be optimistic and think that keeping the total aggregate amount the same would not be controversial. That's
Who
probably
knows? But
optimistic.
yeah,
That's way too optimistic, I know.
right,
But I think it makes sense that if the aggregate amount is the same
right.
on one phase that we had over 3 phases, then there's no effective difference, no practical change.
Yeah, I mean, well, there is some
far as the
practical
financing.
there is some practical change.
Okay.
It does accomplish a political goal of mine, which is to end the incumbent protection plan that is our campaign finance laws.
And say that again more slowly.
It helps end the incumbent protection plan that is our campaign finance laws,
How so?
because by removing the 3 phases, right? Non-incumbents tend to get into the race later, right? Incumbents who are running again just re-up their campaign immediately, right?
Oh, yeah, okay.
So by eliminating that, by getting rid of the potential, by the 3 phases, you allow non-incumbents basically access to the same, not basically, the access to the same level of resources that an incumbent has, even though they get into the race later.
I see.
And you know how I feel about the incumbent protection plans,
Uh,
which is hilarious given that I'm an incumbent. You feel like,
yeah, well,
I tell people that all the time, like, why can't you fix this? I go, it's hard to get incumbents to get rid of the incumbent protection plan. It's you really have to put your own selfishness aside.
so I was being overly optimistic when I said it might not be controversial. Okay.
I don't. Well, I think it.
From a
would hopefully
fairness
be something
standpoint,
we
I
could
think
integrate. Well, fine, yeah.
if that's if you're driven by notions of fairness and reducing barriers to participation, but not everyone's driven by that.
Yeah, that's when it comes to this sort of stuff. I'm an egalitarian. I like it to be.
But I think that principle would be by many sympathizers.
I would feel comfortable defending that principle or promoting it.
We're gonna treat everybody the same.
Mhm.
And then you don't have to worry about the if I were to run, I'm running for governor, not me. The state's not ready for that just yet.
Thank goodness, no.
Not yet.
All right. Well,
Okay, so are we kind of? I mean,
Well,
take that back
we
to
were
our
going
people.
to, we were going, I think Representative Quayle had a list that he had put
yeah,
together.
I have a short list here of things
Yeah.
that seem to me
Right.
I kind of, again, I'm still getting my thinking organized on this, but
Yeah,
clarity revisions. I had 2 sub-bullets and a sub-bullet for one of them. First one, refine and improve the definitions. We've identified some definitions in our first meeting, I think and you've come up with a beginning list, which I haven't had time to read yet, but I will. And then I have another category called removing internal contradictions. It's just a working label. Candidate versus candidate committee. I think a common set of reporting deadlines for candidates and candidate committees is kind of a low-hanging fruit. When you look at what the actual deadlines are for a political committee a candidate committee to report, I mean, it's very close to the 6-month continuing requirement for a candidate. Remember the table in,
Make it all the same. It should be that should be
Make it all-
super
exactly. I think-
super low hanging fruit. Nobody should have an objection to that.
Right. Basically, I'd say, that make candidates committees subject to the same 6-month continuing reporting requirement until the balance on the committee's funds is zeroed out. Right. And another one that should be easy, there's some seeming discrepancies about the reporting period that you have to report on. It was some places you have to report for the period up till Sunday, and there was some ambiguity as to what the actual end date of the period you were reporting on the following Wednesday. And so just make that period, make Sunday the last day for each campaign finance system reporting period. Make it explicit. Your reporting activity through Sunday, inclusive. Maybe just put that word in. So you get a donation or make an expense on Monday, it doesn't go in that report that's due on the Wednesday. So you're looking like I'm not making sense.
No, I
entirely.
think that's just the current law, but I guess you want to make it clear.
I want to make it clear, right? I'm not changing what I think the intent
Okay,
is, but
yeah.
one of the things they told us in that discussion we had with the Secretary of State's office, Secretary of State Scanlon and Mr. Fitch, was that they get a lot of questions about that. Because in one place, it's in the list he gave us. In one place it says, I don't remember the exact wording, maybe someone else can find it, but there was it's not in the law, it was in his list. Anyway, just make it clear that you're reporting activity through the end, midnight on the Sunday before the Wednesday you're filing the report. That should be easy. Should be.
It's footnote 3 on page 7.
Note 3 on page 7.
Okay, I'm clearly a nerd now.
Now.
Own it.
So it's 664.6.
Oh yeah, one place it says,
664.6.
such statements are filed and itemize all receipts and expenditures since the cutoff of the statement under paragraph 2 up until the Monday preceding the filing, and another, it's 664.6, Roman numeral 2-A, and then 664.6 looks like Roman numeral 1 requires a report up to including the Monday before the statement is due. I don't care if it's Sunday or Monday, but just make it the same wording in both those portions of the statute. Right. No argument about that, right? Right. That's an easy one. And we already touched on this earlier. We've got financial agent, fiscal agent, and treasurer. Pick one. I personally would say financial agent, but whatever, pick one. There's easy things. I mean, and they are, details, but the details that are causing people confusion and increasing the workload of the Secretary of State's office also unnecessarily. Those are some easy things, I think. Why don't we talk some, it's my thought, about mandatory use of the online campaign finance system. Now, my view of it is, generally speaking, that I think it's a good idea. Again, so the information is more accessible can be made more accessible to the public. But we also, I think, have to make provision for people who have difficulties with computer skills or availability or online access. Because there are a lot of parts of the state, I think there are still many parts of the state which do not have good internet access. That's being worked on, but anyway, I think we have to make accommodations for people who are in that kind of situation, because again, we don't want to create barriers to participation. So, Mr. Representative Ross.
So yes, and I think the way we do that
Okay.
is we look at the financial the threshold for filing. So if somebody takes in $1,000, they spend $1,000 on their campaign.
Or received receipts.
See, yeah, because you know I'm a big fan of or, right? It's one or the other.
Yep.
If they reach that threshold, then they have to use the system. And my argument, so I'm just throwing $1,000 out now. We can have that conversation about what it should be. But if you've taken in $1,000 of political money, I would argue that you have the sophistication to use the internet.
Currently, they don't have to, you're not required to file a report. Isn't it $1,000 now? Was it raised? It was raised to 1,000. Expenditures or receipts.
Yeah.
Yes.
And if you don't have that level of activity, you don't even have to file a report,
Correct.
to begin with.
Yes, and I would make and I would make the other argument is under that amount, their activity is largely not meaningful. If the goal of the the purpose of the limit, right, is so that the public has a vested interest in knowing what's happening, right? It's I don't think anybody's getting bought off for $1,000 for $100 a year job.
Right.
And
as a
if you are,
secretary-
shame on you. If you are, shame on you. I mean, the hot dog day I heard was a very powerful tool, right? But no, it's whatever the limit is. I mean, I think if you don't qualify for the limit and the limit's $1,000, you probably, if you've taken in $1,000 of expenditures, you've probably in receipts, you've probably have the sophistication to use the internet.
And the money to buy a computer, if you don't have one, or at least a small one that you can,
Tablet.
a tablet, okay.
Yeah, we can discuss whether the $1,000 amount is quite high enough, but yeah, okay, I'm seeing your point.
I mean, you could make that argument. You could just say, if it's over $2,000, then you have to use the online system.
The justification for the campaign finance system being that the public will be aware if there's a possibility of undue influence financially on a candidate.
Correct. And what I've suggested before for the mandatory use of the online system is phasing in over the years. State reps being last, not because I preference ourselves, just because we're the smallest races, taking the least amount of money. But if I was to set it unilaterally, it would be governor and all PACs, one cycle. Then the next cycle I would do council and state senate, and then finally 6 years out I would do state reps, and it's just a phase in over time.
I was more aggressive. But
If you want to go more aggressive, I'm happy to talk about being more aggressive. But that would at least start walking us in the right direction.
If we, as a practical matter, if we form a consensus among this subcommittee and then the full committee, election law committee,
Right.
agrees with us, we still have roughly 382
some odd.
other people potentially who also need to agree.
What I have found is with dealing with our fellow members is that when you put requirements on them very far down the road, they tend to be a little more agreeable to them because they think in their head, oh, that won't apply to me.
Oh, because they will be running.
Correct. It's a body that has 33% of the body turns over every year. So
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
6 years, you've had the potential for nearly 100% turnover. It's obviously not 100% turnover, but you've had
Right.
a significant percentage of turnover because that $100 a year only goes $87.30 after taxes, by the way.
Yeah. I went governor and state senate and the PACs for the first one, and then executive council and the reps.
So I would switch out the Senate and the council because Senate and the
I know,
council,
yeah.
because remember we have to get the Senate to vote for this too.
Right.
So if we just
It's the practical side.
the other side of the body has to support this. So if you just say, hey, guess what, you're going to start using the mandatory reporting, they might go, whoa. But if you give them 2 years to get their ducks in a row, maybe their Senate brains can then handle it.
And the members of the other chamber are also, I think, part-time volunteers, really, right?
They only get paid $100 a year too.
Right. Just
Some say they're overpaid.
No
So-
comment.
So that would make the first group in 2026,
Yeah,
the
and
next group in 2028, and then the House reps. And I guess anybody else, I can't remember, is there anybody else that falls into these, into this?
county commissioners.
That's what I was wondering, but
Oh,
anybody
county-
else,
County maybe, I'm not, you know what, I
Yeah.
don't remember.
but sheriffs and counties,
Sheriff, yeah.
anybody else would come in 2030.
God, really, that's only 6 Gs. Hey, we did hear testimony from the Secretary of State's office that they did not want mandatory enrollment this cycle. Just
Right.
heads up.
Mm.
We don't
Right,
have we
that's-
don't have to agree with that assessment from the Secretary of State's office, but
Well,
just to
I
put it
think-
out there.
I think they got their hands full with the voting machines and redoing ElectionNet and Aaron's nodding over in the back.
I remember things. See, I remember things when they said.
Yeah.
Go up in there.
Okay.
So just something to think about. We don't have to follow that guidance. We are definitely able to do what we want. But just
So again, you were thinking, governor starting when? Not in the 2026?
2026.
yeah, that's
Okay.
why I like the governor packs starting first. They're relatively. I mean, the packs actually make up a large bulk of the filings, but
Yeah.
it keeps the legislative bodies that would be averse to it away from it, and that's where the bulk of the money is getting spent anyways. So that covers the largest swath of money, which in theories
Yeah.
will be a smaller number of the filings. More money, less filings, and then we roll into less money, more filings.
And at the governor's level and for PACs, they are dealing with enough money, they can afford the staff to make sure they can meet the requirement.
Yeah, my experience with and I know we're getting a new CFIS system. My experience is that the CFIS system is faster.
Oh, yeah. Mhm.
It's actually easier to use.
Oh,
I've been using it and
Oh, Lord.
it's, for the most part, it's got,
Yeah,
it's got-
there's some
got
quirks,
some quirks.
Yeah.
But
So where do you want to put executive council, in the first group or the second
I
group?
put them in the first group.
Okay,
the first group,
I mean, well, the counselors are raising some serious cash now.
they are, I know.
This is not.
And there's only 5 of them.
There's only 5 of them.
Yeah.
I mean, there's counselors pulling in $250,000. That's not nothing. You know, the senators, they kind of outside of the leadership,
okay.
they tend to cap out around 100. Obviously, that goes up every single year just by virtue of inflation and that sort of
Right.
stuff. But generally speaking, by doing governor, council, and all PACs, you cover once again, the biggest pool of money. And then you just go into the next pool. I mean, in an ideal world, we would want to, I would say, put House and Senate together in the same year. That's 4 years from now to figure it out. But once again, we have to pitch that to our colleagues, and sometimes they can.
Well, and also just from a system training standpoint, part of me is wondering, you know, if you bring on is there that big a difference of bringing in 400 or 424? Although it's more than that because it's everybody else running, so it's going to be
800 in just the general.
Yeah,
But
But that's assuming they get over $1,000. And
yeah. Okay, all right.
how many state reps are raising more than $1,000? Not a lot of us.
well, there's a significant number who don't. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I would venture to say more don't than do.
Hmm.
You know, most of these guys and gals are just buying their yard signs and a couple of palm cards and moving on.
Yeah.
Some of us have to, represent 30,000 constituents and
I was gonna
run
say,
digital advertisements in mail, and that costs a little more money.
I think the large
Materials.
materials are the ones that are, like curious. Yes.
Yeah, the larger the districts, the more competitive. I mean, it's like all things in politics, right? The larger the district, the more competitive the district, the more the campaign cash is flowing.
Well, the larger the district, the more people you have to reach.
That's
You're not going to reach.
I represent half a Senate district,
How big is your district?
30,000 constituents.
And you're not going to reach 30,000 doing door knocking. Personally.
I've attempted.
Yeah, yeah.
I have attempted. I door knocked. First time I ran in the float, I door knocked myself 4,500 doors. It's a lot of, but it's, to be fair, I have Manchester, so it's not
Right.
like, it's not far to walk in between the houses.
Yeah, some of
How
us,
many of the 4,500 were slammed in your face, Russ?
Very few, Russ. Very, very few.
well, they didn't know him then. Sorry.
Very.
4,500 terrified.
Oh,
Fun fact: second
oh.
time out, I got more votes. They loved it. They're like,
old
"Yes,
joke. I couldn't resist.
He's our
Sorry.
guy. He's our guy. He's our guy.
Yep. Okay, what else
So
would,
you were doing candidate versus candidate committee, and then we got,
right, well,
and then
candidate,
fiscal agent, treasurer, or financial officer?
I like treasurer just for
right, those 300 internal contradictions,
Okay,
make the same reporting deadlines for candidates and candidate committees, make Sunday or
yeah.
make the last day to
Right.
report for the
Right.
succeeding, the last day of activity to be reported for a given report. Make it the same. I think Sunday makes sense. It's, it's Monday. I guess from what I remember from when I was a kid, Sunday is officially the first day of the week. But in terms of economic activity, it still is kind of Monday, right? So I would go with through Sunday. And yeah, financial agent or just
Treasurer.
one term.
I like treasurer just for what it's worth.
I don't have a preference on
Sounds
which of
so
those
fancy.
three examples that are currently in the statute we
Right.
use.
Treasurer sounds so fancy.
Does it?
I'm
Doesn't
the
it?
treasurer.
That's fancy.
Yeah.
It's the United States Department of the Treasury, not the United States Department of Fiscal Agents.
Well, everybody knows what a treasurer is, pretty much, I
That's
think.
true.
It's a word in common use.
Well, the other thing that does happen to that point is you'll see they'll write on there. I know we're going to work on the disclaimer lines.
Yeah.
They'll write on there FA, and then they'll list the fiscal agent
Yeah.
as a wink nod. It's hard to do. I don't know what you would do for treasurer,
PREAS period. I think that's it.
but that's obvious.
Right.
FA is not obvious. Assuming we can't get my dream of not having to list your fiscal agent and your address on your disclaimers.
We're working.
We're getting there.
Okay.
Yeah, actually, I'm not sure how you even enforce that. If someone buys a bunch of signs, they don't put their name on it, and they're unconnected to the candidate and put them out. Can you practically track, in a practical matter, can you track that person down who put the
Right.
signs out? But that's an issue for another day.
Was there anything else on your list? Representative Whalen?
Yeah, I'm taking a look. Well, another political committee type. We discussed a voluntary committee. That's where a group is not obligated to register with the Secretary of State's office. So why do we even offer the opportunity? And the counter argument to not doing it was that, well, that some committees find that useful in terms of their fundraising to have some official status, but is that really our concern? Do we need to add another type of political committee to ease their fundraising? I mean, it's kind of up to them to gain the confidence of potential contributors, I think.
Right.
So is that one we could dispense with?
Which one?
There's one called a voluntary.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they just decide they want to.
They want to, and
Yeah.
what we heard in the discussion
Right.
was that some organizations find this helpful in soliciting contributions. But
Yeah.
let's
It's
see.
number 7 on page 4.
Okay, thank you. Right, political committee, voluntary registration. Any segregated fund not required to register and report receipts and expenditures, but who does register.
Yeah.
Anyone can register, but not required.
So is that one that's redundant or?
It's just that they voluntarily decide to do it.
Even though they weren't required.
This is on page 1, very first line in this write-up actually. Issues. 1, 9 different types of registration is very complex. That,
Is there a RSA reference to that last one, voluntary?
No.
No, I
but
don't
the-
see one.
But the types are defined in, bear with me. Yeah, it's 664 too, I think, or where?
I'm looking at them right now. Yeah, 664.
Reporting by political committee.
Even the point of that.
Well, I just said the explanation we had for why there's
Yeah.
apparently some sentiment in favor of it, which is,
Yeah, it's E, you're right. I think Representative Quayle said the reason is they want to look more official for raising funds, but I don't.
and I can understand why that might be more advantageous for some groups.
Well, without the explicit authorization, you can make the argument that the Secretary of State could reject the filing. So that could be another reason why it was put in there. I don't think that they would, but you could see that argument being made. Oh, you haven't met the threshold, you don't need to file.
Let's see.
Throw it away.
The committee type is, this is the last sentence in the description. The full description, as a voluntary registration, there is no deadline for registration. However, once registered, the voluntary registration political committee must comply with receipts and expenditure reporting requirements. The committee type is revised to the applicable type if the committee's receipts and/or expenditures reach the level that requires the committee to register. I mean, I'm not adamant on this. I mean, it's just, I'm not seeing the need for it.
I'm fine deleting it. I don't see the
Yeah.
point of it. If
Yeah.
our goal is to streamline it, what's the point?
Yeah.
I guess, can somebody make the argument of keeping it in?
I don't know, we can go back and ask the Secretary of State.
I mean, unless there's an argument to keep it in, this is one of those without objections.
Is somebody making notes on these things? Because, thank you.
The resident nerd is quickly writing. I say that with all love. As a fellow nerd.
Uh, Yeah, another item I had in the list was previous election cycle contributions. And it had to do with limiting them to satisfying debt that had been incurred. And and your point on that, I just want to go over this one more time to fix it in my mind. Your concern about that was, as a practical matter, you're not aware of anyone besides a candidate that loans to a campaign. It just doesn't happen very often, if at all.
In my
Right.
12 years of reading campaign finance reports,
Yep.
Which there may be one other person in the state who's read that as much as I have, and that other person is probably in the room. I am not aware of a single instance in which a loan has been given to a candidacy that wasn't from the candidate.
Were you just a moment ago referring to someone else as the resident nerd?
Yes.
Did I hear that right? Oh, okay, just curious.
I love reading campaign finance reports. I'm sick in the head like that.
All right. So anyway, I think your way of addressing that concern was to set a deadline by which a candidate has to have repay those loans.
Correct. No contribute. Basically, whatever the deadline is, no contribution after that date can be put towards repaying that loan. The loan is effectively at that point. The remainder of that loan is converted to a contribution from the candidate.
Which doesn't violate any limits because there are no limits on
There
candidate contributions to their own campaigns.
Correct.
I think that sounds reasonable. We can discuss the details of how long they would have,
Yeah.
but
I wouldn't make it a day.
A day.
But I also wouldn't make it unlimited like it is now, or it could be interpreted to be now. That-
Yeah, I mean, you didn't mean make it one day, you meant make it
Give
a
it
date certain.
a defined period after the election that is reasonable.
maybe a year. Again, we can find something that's reasonable.
Reasonable. We
Right.
can debate, we won't do it today, but we can debate what reasonable is.
We don't need to figure that out today. All right, I think that that approach so far sounds okay to me. The caveat so far, but
The devil's in the details.
that was the gist of my list that we hadn't, that I had so far.
And that's a transparency issue too. So I mean,
Yep.
I feel like all sides can walk away from that with a win.
Okay. Would the committee be interested in soliciting comments from members of the public who are present, or
Sure.
or maybe a representative from the Secretary of State's office?
Fellow campaign finance nerds. This really gets people. People get really excited about campaign finance. It's a real,
Well, I'm finding it
it's
interesting.
the
so
third rail of New Hampshire politics.
does that mean I'm one of the resident nerds then? Probably.
By virtue of sitting on this committee, we are all the residential nerds. When our own committee members are like, "Ooh, I don't know if I want to sit on campaign finance," you're like, "Ah, yeah, I understand."
Well, that's consistent.
Literally what-
Being a nerd on this committee is
You have to.
consistent with the rest of my life history, so I have no complaints. I'm going to invite Deputy Secretary of State, Erin. If you have some thoughts you'd like to share with us, having listened to our discussion. We have 26 minutes before the meeting ends.
I don't have 26 minutes, but thank you, Chairman and Committee. Thanks for doing all your diligence, continuing to look at this. Secretary Scanlon did want me to let you know that he is continuing to work on possible suggestions to, especially the definition section and what a committee is and what the options are. And just listening to your past discussion on debt, I just want to remind the committee that there is other forms of debt other than loans. Sometimes bills for your campaign don't come in right away, especially when you've hired staff, or there'll be a time period where there'll be other debts that come in that are not self-loans to your committee. But that there should be a time period where that election cycle ends and the next one begins. So when you're looking at dates for campaign finance reporting online, whatever that date is for the 2026 cycle, perhaps it's November 30th of 24 that reporting online has to start. Just thinking of all the information that you have to digest and require for those who are required to use the online campaign finance system. So whatever you set as the end date of an election cycle and when a new one would begin.
Right.
I'm happy to take some questions back
No,
to the office.
I see your point on that. The 2026 elections, right? A natural start of that election cycle would be after the general election of 2024, which is what we were discussing earlier. That was my thinking.
And I think to our voluntary comments, sometimes somebody voluntarily submits information. It's not a committee. It's just that they think they're going to spend more than $1,000. So they voluntarily self-report before that deadline is, or that threshold is met. So that's what the voluntarily reporting comment was made from our office at. So if you voluntarily report your expenses and contributions before the $1,000 limit, you have to continue to report those even though you haven't met the $1,000 limit yet.
For example, someone who's a candidate.
Yes.
But-
Any across the board, anyone.
But any of those committee types, political committee types, could do that.
Yes, anyone could do that.
So we don't. Okay, so again, I'm not seeing a need for a special.
Oh, no, it's not a special type of committee. It's
Right,
just,
right, but
it's
in
just
the
the
list
requirements of reporting
Right.
that they're required to do.
in the list we got from Mr. Fitch prepared, which I'm going to say again, has been very, very useful. He listed that as one of the 9 types of political committee that's defined. And it's looking to me even more so since your comments that is redundant. It's,
I apologize. I don't have that sheet in front of me, but I think the
that's fine.
voluntary thing could apply to any of them. And once that threshold's met, then we have to define which type of 9 they fit under.
all right.
Right. I have a
Okay,
question.
yes, Representative Lane.
Thank you. On the mandatory use of the filing system, it- you heard what we were proposing, like to phase it in, but does that make sense to you? Is that something from your office's like administrative that you
I
think
think
makes sense, or do you want to get back to us on that, or?
I think whatever you decide as the deadlines would be fine. That's your policy decision. So, but we'll have the system, the new system up and operating and ready to take all of them.
Okay.
if that's what you decide.
I just wanted to make sure we weren't setting a deadline that wasn't gonna. Oh, I have another question. I have another question. You mentioned that Secretary Scanlon's working on definitions. If we come up with them, because I'm kind of, should we give those to him? Should we wait, have a working session with him, or what would he prefer? Do you know, or should we get back?
I'm happy to bring them to the next meeting or meet with somebody individual beforehand. So
Okay.
whatever works best for
Yeah.
the committee.
I'm not sure that we're really quite ready
Okay.
yet, but if he has some ideas, that would be great. So, yeah, because I did a couple, but nobody's had a chance to look at them. So.
And we understand that the Secretary of State's office always works very well to carry out the policy decisions of the legislature, but we still like hearing your opinions.
Mhm.
Thank you.
I personally don't like fax machines, but that's me personally.
Oh.
How do you feel about 12-point font?
Times New Roman, please.
Too soon? Too soon?
Do we have other questions for Ms. Deputy Hennessy? No?
Thank
Well,
you.
Thank you very much. We have some time.
Does anyone else want to?
That's what I was about to
Oh,
ask.
okay.
Is there anyone else, any members of the public that have some thoughts they would like to share with us? Would be interested to hear them. If not, that's fine too. Okay, I'm not seeing a rush to the microphone. Yes, sir. If you'd like to step up to the microphone, or-
Even if you're being nice, you have to do it from the microphone so people at home can
And
know how
please-
nice that you are.
and please state your name. Someone's saying something nice, we really want them on record.
Yes, yeah, definitely. Yeah, if you could, hold her up and put your hand on the Bible.
So to repeat myself, I'm very appreciative of what you're doing. Bob Perry,
Thank you.
Town of Stratford. This might be the give and take is terrific. So I'm very appreciative of what you're doing.
Well, thank you for your thoughts.
Thank you.
It's my view that with a small group like that, the point is to have a coherent discussion, and I think we're achieving that without the formality that's typical and I would say needed in a full committee meeting, and we'll continue to do it this way as long as it works on this subcommittee. Thank you again. All right,
It's a testament to the chairman and the person who picked the chairman.
oh, absolutely. Again, we're in agreement. Well, he did, but have to say it himself. No. Oh, well, if you don't have a sense of humor, life is a lot harder. Are there any other topics that we think it's worth discussing that we need to discuss today? We don't have to stay until 12.
I'm good. In fact, I have somebody who wants to meet at 11:45, so I'd love it if we pieced out.
Okay, so I'm going to reiterate what I said at the beginning of the meeting because I like reiterating because most people don't. Well, never mind. Won't go there about how often people listen. But anyway, I'm going to schedule our next meeting for 2 weeks from today. That'll be the 13th. And I'm going to schedule one more meeting after that. Not necessarily the final meeting, but another meeting for the 27th. And I think we've had, this is our fourth meeting? I think so. So we've had a lot of opportunity to discuss this and find the areas of agreement. Right. That I agree, that would be ideal. Yep, thank you.
Oh, don't threaten me with a good time.
No, they were very nice and explained what the delay was, and they're working on it.
Okay. And that would work well for us because then the meeting after that, we could start maybe aiming towards what a report would look like. And I'm going to say it one more time because I think it's important. I think we're all agreed. We're looking for we're all agreed. We're looking for the areas of agreement that we can pursue and that we think our colleagues will also agree with. All right. So 2 meetings at least. And we'll start to think about generating a report. That's it. It'll be the same time, 10 a.m., Tuesday the 13th and the 27th. That work for everybody?
Yep. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. In the absence of desire for further discussion, I will adjourn this meeting at 11:43.
Some say